Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. The rain came down in relentless sheets, drenching the towering pines of the Pacific Northwest and turning the forest floor into a swampy mire. Jacob Walker pulled his hood tighter against the howling wind, his boots squelching through the muck. His flashlight cut through the gloom, casting long, flickering shadows against the trees. Nights like this made his job as a park ranger feel more like a battle against nature than a guardianship of it. The storm had arrived without warning, catching hikers and campers unprepared. Jacob had spent the better part of the evening ensuring that the trails were clear and that no one was stranded. Now, as the storm raged, he was ready to head back to his cabin. That was when he heard a faint, high-pitched sound that stopped him in his tracks. At first, he thought it might be the wind slicing through the trees. But as he listened closer, his pulse quickened. It was a cry. An animal, maybe, or a child. Whatever it was in distress. Jacob swept his flashlight across the dark forest, following the sound deeper into the woods. The cry grew louder, more desperate, and led him to a clearing where a swollen stream surged through the underbrush. At the water's edge, he spotted a small, tiger-striped creature struggling against the current. "What the?" he muttered, stepping closer. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen. It looked like a cub baby tiger, perhaps, but its stripes glimmered faintly, even in the rain-soaked darkness. Its body was sleek and compact, but its large, luminous eyes were filled with panic as it thrashed against the water's pull. Without hesitation, Jacob waded into the stream. The cold water surged around his legs, threatening to knock him off balance. He braced himself and reached out, grasping the cub's scruff and pulling it free from the current. The creature went limp in his arms, shivering violently. "Easy there, little guy," Jacob murmured, cradling it against his chest. The fur felt warm to the touch, almost unnaturally so, despite its soaking wet condition. As he carried it to the safety of the bank, he couldn't help but notice the faint, otherworldly shimmer emanating from its coat. Back on dry ground, Jacob set the cub down and examined it more closely. Its breathing was shallow, but steady, and its eyes round and glowing like twin amber moons stared up at him with an intensity that made him uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary animal. "You're a strange one," he said, shaking his head. "But you're safe now." The cub let out a soft chirping sound and nuzzled into his jacket as if it understood him. Jacob felt a pang of unexpected protectiveness. He couldn't leave the creature here, not with the storm still raging. Wrapping it tightly in his jacket, he stood and began the trek back to his cabin. As he walked, he wondered where the cub had come from. The nearest tiger sanctuary was hundreds of miles away, and no big cats were native to this region. Yet this creature seemed even stranger than a misplaced tiger. Something about its shimmering fur and those uncanny eyes hinted at an origin far beyond what Jacob could comprehend. By the time he reached his cabin, the storm had begun to subside. Jacob placed the cub on a thick blanket near the fireplace and lit a fire to warm the room. The creature curled up immediately, its strange glow dimming to a soft hum as it drifted off to sleep. Jacob stood over it, his mind racing with questions. What was this thing? Where had it come from? And why did he have the nagging feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger? As the rain drummed against the cabin windows and the fire crackled in the hearth, Jacob couldn't shake the eerie sense that he had just stepped into a story far beyond his understanding. The morning sun crept through the blinds of Jacob's cabin, casting soft beams over the rustic interior. He woke to the crackle of the dying fire and the faint, rhythmic breathing of the cub he had rescued. Stretching, he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and glanced over to where the strange creature lay on the blanket. Jacob froze. The cub, which had looked fragile and waterlogged the night before, now seemed almost radiant. Its fur gleamed faintly, catching the sunlight in a way that no earthly pelt ever could. The glow wasn't just a trick of the light, it was subtle but unmistakable. Its stripes, shimmering with a metallic sheen, seemed to ripple as the cub stirred in its sleep. Jacob knelt beside it, his ranger instincts battling with his curiosity. "What are you?" he whispered. The cub's eyes flicked open, locking onto Jacob with a piercing gaze. Those luminous, amber eyes weren't just intelligent, they were calculating, aware. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't an ordinary animal. It wasn't just a tiger cub that had wandered too far from home. It wasn't from this planet. As the realization sank in, the cub stretched, emitting a soft chirping sound that reminded Jacob of a bird's call. It climbed to its feet with surprising agility, its movements fluid and graceful. It padded over to Jacob, its shimmering coat radiating warmth. Before Jacob could react, the creature pressed its forehead gently against his knee. That was when it happened. Jacob's mind exploded with images, sensations, and emotions that weren't his own. He saw glimpses of a vast, star-filled sky and a ship hurtling through the void. He felt the panic of something going wrong, a crash, a separation, and then the cold loneliness of being lost. The images faded as quickly as they had come, leaving Jacob breathless. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the couch for support. What did you just do?" he gasped, staring at the cub in shock. The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes steadying him. Then, to Jacob's astonishment, it began to project images again, this time more deliberate. He saw himself wading into the stream, rescuing the cub from the rushing water. It was as if the creature was thanking him, showing him that it remembered. "You're communicating," Jacob realized, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're showing me what you feel, what you've been through." The cub chirped again, and Jacob couldn't help but laugh nervously. He sat down on the floor, eye level with the creature. "All right, Stripe," he said, giving it the nickname that had popped into his head the night before. "Looks like you're not just some lost animal. You're something else entirely." The cub responded by nuzzling his hand, its warmth soothing. As Jacob examined it more closely, he noticed faint markings along its fur patterns that looked almost like runes or circuitry. They pulsed faintly, as if alive. He reached out tentatively, running his fingers along the strange patterns. The cub chirped in approval, and for a moment, Jacob felt a connection deeper than anything he had ever experienced. Over the next few days, Stripe's recovery astonished Jacob. The wounds and bruises it had sustained from the storm healed at an unnaturally rapid pace, disappearing almost overnight. It grew stronger and more alert, exploring the cabin with an air of curiosity. But its most remarkable trait was its intelligence. Stripe wasn't just surviving, it was learning. It observed everything Jacob did with intense focus, mimicking simple actions like opening a cupboard or turning on a lamp. One evening, as Jacob sat at his desk jotting down his thoughts in a notebook, Stripe hopped onto the table and pawed at a pen. It stared at the pen for a long moment before nudging it toward Jacob, an almost playful look in its glowing eyes. "You're not just smart," Jacob murmured, watching the cub in awe. "You're advanced." But there was another side to Stripe's recovery that unsettled Jacob. At night, the cub would sometimes sit by the window, its glowing eyes fixed on the sky. It would emit low, mournful chirps, a sound that sent shivers down Jacob's spine. Whatever Stripe had shown him that first morning, the crash, the loneliness, it wasn't just a memory. It was a call for help. Jacob began to piece together the fragments of Stripe's story. It had come from somewhere far beyond Earth, part of a larger group that had crash-landed in the forest. Separated from its pack, Stripe had been alone, lost, and vulnerable until Jacob had found it. But where was the rest of Stripe's group? Were they alive? And if they were, what would they do if they found Stripe? Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. As Stripe grew stronger and more connected to him, Jacob knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just a rescue. This was the start of something far bigger than himself, and he had no idea what was coming next. The forest had never felt so alive, nor so foreboding. The days had passed in a strange blur since Jacob first rescued Stripe, and now the mysterious cub seemed to be pushing him towards something. Every time Jacob tried to go about his normal routine, Stripe would chirp insistently and nudge him toward the door. The creature's urgency had grown with each passing day. On the 5th evening after the storm, Stripe's behavior became impossible to ignore. It darted around the cabin, pausing by the door and fixing Jacob with those piercing amber eyes. Then, as if impatient, it projected another telepathic image this time, a vivid map of the forest trails Jacob knew so well. The image zoomed in on a secluded grove deep within the woods, far from any marked paths. Jacob recognized the area instantly. "You want me to take you there," Jacob said, his voice uneasy. Stripe chirped, the sound sharp and affirmative. Jacob hesitated. Something about this felt bigger than anything he was ready to handle. But the urgency in Stripe's gaze left him no choice. Grabbing his pack and flashlight, he prepared for the trek. Stripe leapt onto his shoulder, settling there like a glowing sentinel as they set out into the night. The journey was grueling. The air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the underbrush clung to Jacob's legs as if trying to hold him back. The farther they went, the more the forest seemed to change. The familiar trees gave way to twisted, ancient trunks, their gnarled roots snaking across the forest floor like veins. A strange, faint hum filled the air, so subtle at first that Jacob thought he was imagining it. As they neared the grove, Stripe became more animated. It leapt from Jacob's shoulder and darted ahead, its shimmering coat a beacon in the dim light. Jacob quickened his pace, his pulse pounding in time with the growing hum. Finally, they emerged into a wide clearing, and Jacob stopped dead in his tracks. The grove was bathed in an unearthly light. At its center lay what could only be described as a ship, sleek and organic, its surface pulsing faintly like a living thing. It was partially buried under layers of moss and foliage, as if the forest had tried to reclaim it. Around the ship stood a group of creatures, each one larger and more imposing than Stripe. Jacob's breath caught in his throat. The aliens were unlike anything he had ever imagined. They shared Stripe's luminous eyes and shimmering fur, but their bodies were taller and more angular, their markings more intricate. Each movement they made was fluid and deliberate, as if every step carried a weight of purpose. Their presence radiated both power and grace. One of them turned toward Jacob, and he felt an overwhelming wave of emotion, not fear, but something akin to awe. The alien tilted its head and stepped closer, its glowing eyes locking onto Jacob's. It extended a paw-like appendage, and before Jacob could react, his mind was flooded with images once again. This time, the vision was clearer. He saw the alien ship, vast and beautiful, gliding through the cosmos. He felt their purpose. They were explorers, peaceful travelers seeking knowledge and connection. Then came the disaster, a sudden malfunction, a crash landing on an unfamiliar planet. Jacob felt their desperation, their struggle to survive in an alien wilderness. And then he saw Stripe, a young member of their group, swept away by the storm. The vision shifted. He saw himself wading into the stream, saving Stripe, and carrying it to safety. The emotion that followed was profound gratitude. They had been searching for Stripe ever since, and now they had found it, thanks to him. The images faded, leaving Jacob trembling. The alien in front of him made a soft, resonant sound that seemed to echo in his chest. Stripe chirped and bounded to its pack, nuzzling one of the larger aliens. The reunion was tender, almost familial, and Jacob felt a strange pang of joy watching it. But the moment of warmth was short-lived. One of the aliens turned toward the ship and let out a low, mournful sound. The others followed, their gazes heavy with sorrow. Jacob didn't need telepathy to understand they were stranded. The ship was damaged beyond repair, and they lacked the resources to fix it. Stripe chirped urgently and projected a new image into Jacob's mind, a vision of materials, tools, and energy sources. Jacob recognized some of the items, rare metals, specific components that could be scavenged from Earth. The aliens needed his help to gather these supplies. Without them, they would be trapped here, unable to return home. Jacob hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "You need me to help you fix this," he said aloud, gesturing toward the ship. The aliens responded with a unified hum, a sound that resonated with hope and urgency. Stripe, now sitting at Jacob's feet, chirped softly and gazed up at him with those glowing eyes. Jacob took a deep breath, his mind racing. He had no idea how he was going to pull this off, but one thing was clear: these beings were peaceful, and they trusted him. They had no one else to turn to. "All right," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions within him. "I'll help you. Whatever it takes." The aliens hummed again, their gratitude washing over him like a warm tide. As Jacob stood in the clearing, surrounded by beings from another world, he couldn't help but wonder, had he stumbled into this by chance, or had he been destined to play a role in something far bigger than himself? The weeks that followed felt like living in a dream. By day, Jacob worked tirelessly to gather the resources needed to repair the alien ship. By night, he sat with Stripe and the others, learning more about their world through the incredible telepathic projections they shared. Each image was like a window into a vast, infinite cosmos worlds with floating cities, crystalline oceans, and skies teeming with life unlike anything Earth had ever seen. The materials they needed weren't easy to find. Some components, like rare metals, required venturing to scrapyards and abandoned industrial sites. Others needed ingenuity, as Jacob improvised tools and scavenged replacements for alien technology. The aliens worked alongside him, their incredible intellect and precise coordination making tasks that would have taken days into hours. One evening, as Jacob sat by the fire with Stripe curled at his side, he asked the question that had been nagging him for days. "Why me?" His voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Out of all the people you could have crossed paths with, why did this happen to me?" Stripe chirped softly, and an image appeared in Jacob's mind. It wasn't of the stars or alien worlds, but of himself wading into the stream, pulling Stripe from the water. The emotions tied to the image were powerful: gratitude, trust, and a deep sense of connection. The message was clear. They hadn't chosen Jacob, Jacob had chosen them the moment he stepped into the stream. By the third week, the ship began to take shape again. Its sleek, organic surface repaired itself slowly but surely as Jacob and the aliens installed the salvaged components. The process was fascinating to watch, each piece integrated into the ship like a growing organism, pulsing with an almost sentient energy. As the ship neared completion, the aliens became more animated, their excitement palpable. Stripe, in particular, seemed torn between joy and sorrow. It spent more time by Jacob's side, as if aware that their time together was nearing its end. The final piece was the hardest to acquire, a high-energy capacitor needed to power the ship's core. Jacob knew there was only one place nearby that might have such a thing: a military base on the outskirts of the forest. It was risky, but there was no other option. Under the cover of night, Jacob and Stripe approached the base. Using a mix of stealth and luck, they managed to sneak into the storage area and locate the capacitor. As they made their way out, Stripe emitted a low, resonant hum, as if sensing danger. Moments later, a guard's flashlight swept through the area, forcing Jacob and Stripe to hide. The tension was suffocating, but after what felt like an eternity, the guard moved on, and they escaped undetected. With the capacitor in hand, the aliens completed their repairs. The ship, now fully restored, gleamed under the moonlight in the grove. Its surface shimmered like liquid silver, pulsating with energy. The aliens stood together, their luminous eyes fixed on Jacob. He felt their gratitude like a wave of warmth washing over him. As the aliens prepared for departure, the leader of the group stepped forward. It projected a series of images into Jacob's mind, memories of their time together, the crash, and their gratitude for his help. But there was something more, an invitation. They wanted Jacob to come with them. Jacob's breath caught. The images shifted, showing glimpses of their homeworld, a place of breathtaking beauty, with landscapes that defied the limits of imagination. He felt the weight of the offer. They weren't just inviting him to visit, they were offering him a chance to leave Earth behind and join them in exploring the stars. For a long moment, Jacob stood in the clearing, the ship's soft hum filling the air. He looked at Stripe, who chirped softly, its glowing eyes full of hope. But as much as the offer tempted him, Jacob couldn't ignore the life he'd built on Earth, the trails he patrolled, the people he helped, and the home he'd come to love. I can't, he said, his voice heavy. This is my home. But, thank you. The leader regarded him for a moment, then nodded, as if understanding. Stripe chirped mournfully and nuzzled Jacob one last time before returning to its pack. The aliens stepped aboard their ship, their movements graceful and deliberate. The ship began to hum louder, its pulsating glow intensifying. As it lifted off the ground, Jacob stepped back, shielding his eyes from the brilliant light. The ship rose higher and higher, then shot into the sky with a burst of energy, disappearing into the stars. Jacob stood in the clearing long after the ship had vanished, the night now eerily quiet. He felt a mix of emotions: loss, wonder, and a deep sense of fulfillment. He had been part of something extraordinary, something few people could ever imagine. And though he had chosen to stay, a part of him would always look to the stars with a sense of longing. Back at his cabin, Jacob found a small object on his desk, something the aliens must have left behind. It was a crystal-like sphere, faintly glowing with the same light as Stripe's fur. When he touched it, images of the stars filled his mind once more. Jacob smiled. Though the aliens were gone, he knew he would never truly be alone. He had helped bridge the gap between two worlds, and for the rest of his life, he would carry a piece of their universe with him. As he placed the sphere on the mantel, he whispered to himself, "I'll be watching for you out there."